Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Surah Al-Maa'idah, ayah number 67. قال الله تبارك وتعالى: يا أيها الرسول بلغ ما أنزل إليك من ربك وإن لم تفعل فما بلغت رسالته والله يعصمك من الناس إن الله لا يهدي القوم الكافرين. This ayah calls out to the messenger: O messenger, balligh, the order form of ballagha yuballighu tablighan, to convey what has been sent down to you from your Rabb, meaning the Quran. He says, if you do not do so, then you have not conveyed the message. Now, on face value, this may not make sense, because if you do not convey the message, then you have not conveyed the message, and therefore the ayah appears not to mention anything of value. It's just repeating itself. But the way to understand it is to say that if the Prophet even conceals one part of the Quran, then it is as if he has concealed the whole of the Quran. So the ayah is saying it's all or nothing. You cannot just convey part of the Quran and not other parts. He says that Allah will ya'asimuka, from asama ya'asimu, to protect or to guard, or to be the guardian of someone. Allah will be your guardian against the people. In other words, the people want to prevent you from delivering the message. They will even go to the length of killing you. But Allah Jalla wa Ala will prevent that from happening. So do not worry about the people preventing you from delivering the message. Also, do not hide the message because you fear the people, as they will not be able to harm you. So there is no excuse in not delivering the whole message when you are completely safe in doing so. And before this ayah, the Prophet would want people from his companions to guard him. After this ayah was revealed, he did not ask for anyone to guard him. He also says that indeed Allah does not guide the kafirin. Now this could either mean that Allah will not guide the kuffar in killing you or stopping you from delivering the message. So that makes sense. It could also mean that Allah does not guide the kuffar into embracing Islam. So of course this is the grand guidance. Now if that's the case, then the kuffar mentioned in this ayah are those whose hearts are sealed and they will never ever believe. Otherwise we know there are plenty of kuffar who are guided to al-Islam. So the kuffar mentioned in this ayah would be those whose hearts are sealed. So reflecting on this ayah, we can pick up that the Prophet is a messenger because the word ar-Rasul is used. Now, how is that a big deal? It's a big deal because the honor of a messenger is dependent on the honor of the one who sent him. If, for example, the envoy of a king comes to you with a message, that envoy would be honored because the honor of the king rubs off on him. And you are obviously likely to honor the envoy of the king. So how about then the messenger from Allah Jalla wa Ala? Allah Jalla wa Ala is the source of all honor. And so therefore some of this honor rubs off on the Prophet as well. We find the obvious lesson that it is imperative on the Prophet to convey the whole of the message and not to hide even one ayah or one word of an ayah. And this is indeed what he did. And what demonstrates this to us is that in the Quran there are ayat which actually rebuke the Prophet. Had the Prophet been a false prophet, suppose, he would not want to put his reputation on the line by having ayat in the Quran which actually rebuke him and tell him that he has done wrong and made a mistake. Surely this would turn the people away from him. And yet we find in the Quran there are ayat which actually rebuke him, which tell him, for example, you feared the people, but Allah was more worthy to be feared, which rebuke him, for example, for letting certain people off fighting and not ascertaining whether they are liars or truthful. We have other ayat rebuking him for taking the ransom for the prisoners of the Battle of Badr and not executing them. We have an ayah which rebukes him for turning away from Abdullah ibn Maktoum, the blind man, and turning his attention to the mushrikeen. This was wrong. There is no doubt the Prophet conveyed everything. even the uncomfortable ayat. And in this there's a lesson for us. You find many Muslims, when they come across evidence which happens to be uncomfortable and not in accordance with popular culture, they try to reinterpret it and try to make it agree and concord with popular culture. And they might feel embarrassed of certain ayat or a hadith. And this is simply a weakness in Iman. Look at how the Prophet conveyed those ayat which were uncomfortable for him. However, his sense of integrity to Allah Jalla wa Ala trumps his sense of embarrassment. Also in this ayah there is a refutation against the Rafidah, who claim that there are parts of the Quran not conveyed to us, and how they talk about Ali radiallahu anh being the first Khalifa, and all these other types of lies that they concoct. We may also extend from this ayah that the scholars are also obliged to convey the message. Why is that? Well, the scholars are not messengers, obviously, but they are inheritors of the prophets. And so what it means to be an inheritor of the Prophet is that you act the same way as the Prophet and you walk the same path as the prophets and messengers, which is to convey the message and not conceal any knowledge. We also learn that concealing part of the Sharia is just like concealing the whole of the Sharia, so the standards are high. And we contrast that with the Yahud and Nasara, who are always concealing part of their Sharia which is uncomfortable for them, or perhaps reinterpreting the parts of their Sharia which are uncomfortable. We also find the care that Allah Jalla wa Ala has for the Prophet, that he will protect him from the people. One might object and say, but did the Prophet not die from a poisoned meat that a Jewish woman served him in the year of Khaybar, in the 7th year? The answer is yes, indeed he died because of that poison eventually, but that was only after he had conveyed the message, so that Allah Jalla wa Ala will protect him so that no one can block the message off or prevent the Prophet from conveying the message. As for when the message has been fully conveyed, then of course the Prophet has to die at some point. We may also take that those people whose hearts are sealed, then there is literally nothing you can do to guide them. So if you're giving da'wah to a person and it appears to you that this person's heart is sealed off and his heart and mind is completely closed off to the da'wah that you're giving this person, then do not bother continuing. Move on to giving da'wah to someone else. Ayah number 68. قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ لَسْتُمْ عَلَى شَيْءٍ حَتَّى تُقِيمُوا التَّوْرَاةَ وَالْإِنْجِيلَ وَمَا أُنْزِلَ إِلَيْكُمْ مِنْ رَبِّكُمْ وَلَيَزِيدَنَّ كَثِيرًا مِنْهُمْ مَا أُنْزِلَ إِلَيْكَ مِنْ رَبِّكَ طُغْيَانًا وَكُفْرًا فَلَا تَأْسَ عَلَى الْقَوْمِ الْكَافِرِينَ. The Prophet is told to call out to the Yahud and Nasara and tell them that you are not upon anything, meaning to say you are upon no religion which Allah is pleased with, until you establish the Torah and the Injil, which basically means to believe it and act in accordance with it. And the reason why they are ordered to do that is because the Torah and the Injil, and indeed all other scriptures, they have the mentioning of the Prophet and the teachings of Al-Islam. So if they were to follow the Torah and the Injil, it would lead them to following the Prophet, as mentioned before in Ayah 64. وَمَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْكُمْ مِنْ رَبِّكُمْ, and what has been sent down to you from your Rabb, meaning the Quran. And then the ayah says, similar to Ayah 64 actually, that the Quran is going to increase many of them, meaning from the Ahlul Kitab, in tughyan and kufr. So tughyan meaning exceeding the bounds, be it against Allah in sinning or against other people, and kufr meaning in their rejection of Al-Islam and the Quran. He says, فَلَا تَأْسَ, from أَسِيَ يَأْسَ, asan, which means to grieve for the disbelieving folk. So reflecting on this ayah, we immediately pick up that the Yahud and Nasara are not upon the correct deen. They are upon falsehood. We pick up that they are ordered to properly believe in the Torah and the Injil. Now note that this means the Torah and the Injil revealed to the respective prophets, Musa alayhi salam and Isa alayhi salam, It does not mean these Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. These are obviously man-made documents. We notice that he addresses them as Ahlul Kitab, despite the fact that these people are not true believers in the scriptures, because if they were, they would believe in the last prophet as well. But he's addressing them as Ahlul Kitab in order to establish evidence against them, meaning to say, you people are people of the scripture, and yet still you disbelieve in the prophet. At least with the mushrikeen, they have no scripture and no knowledge in the first place. So it is a bit more understandable why they would disbelieve. But what is your excuse, O people of the book? So because you're people of the book, you have the knowledge and yet still you disbelieve. This is yet more ugly. We learn in this ayah what we learned before, that the ayat of the Quran can actually increase people in their kufr, which means kufr is of levels if it increases. And this is the result of a sealed heart. On the other hand, the ayat of the Quran can increase people in their iman as well, so it works both ways. We also find that Allah Jalla wa Ala in His mercy grants solace to the Prophet when He tells him not to grieve for the kuffar. And in this there is a lesson for us as well. When we are giving da'wah and people reject us, perhaps they might mock us or abuse us, do not feel sorry for such people. Let them go and move on to giving da'wah to other people who might be more open to the truth. But do not weep after the kuffar. They are not worth it. Ayah 69. Inna alladhina amanu walladhina hadu was-sabi'una wan-nasara man amana billahi wal-yawmi al-akhiri wa amila salihan fala khawfun alayhim wala hum yahzanun. This ayah is similar to ayah number 62 of Surah Al-Baqarah, which has, of course, preceded. So it says, indeed, those who believe, referring to the Muslimin, وَالَّذِينَ هَادُوا, and those who made hod, which means to return, when they returned or repented from worshipping the golden cow, referring to the Jews. وَالصَّابِئُونَ, as-sabi refers to those people who do not follow the religion of their forefathers. So they do not particularly have any organized religion themselves, as they are not following the religion of their forefathers, which is what most people do. So this ayah teaches us that all of these people, anyone who believes and works righteousness, meaning in accordance with the Sunnah, then there will be no fear on such a person on the day of Qiyamah, despite all the horrors of Yawm al-Qiyamah. وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ, nor they shall be sad, meaning for all the pleasures that have passed them by and the suffering and so on. They will not regret anything, nor will they grieve for any pleasures that they missed out on. In this ayah, the word sabi'un is marfu' with the waw, despite the fact that it comes after the inna, and this is because it does not directly come after the inna. One explanation is given that when he says inna alladhina amanu, this is the ism inna, and the khabar is la khawfun alayhim wa la hum yahzanun. And when he says walladhina hadu, they say this is not ma'atuf in following the alladhina amanu, rather this is a mubtada. It is beginning a new sentence, so therefore it is marfu'. And so therefore the sabi'un, which follows walladhina hadu, is ma'atuf, therefore is also marfu', which is why you find the waw and the noon. So the waw in the walladhina hadu is not waw lil ataf, which means when the word follows its predecessor, rather it is lil isti'naf, which means to begin a new sentence, because the waw can be used for this and for that. It is flexible. Upon this, the word al-nasara will also be marfu', because it is in following of the sabi'un, except you cannot see the waw clearly because it ends with an alif maksura. So based on this, when the ayah goes on to say man amana billahi wal yawmil akhiri wa amila salihan, then this part refers to the walladhina hadu was-sabi'una wan-nasara. It does not refer to the beginning part inna alladhina amanu, because that part already tells us that they believe. So there's no point in saying man amana billahi wal yawm al-akhir, because then that would just be a repetition and no use. So reflecting on this ayah, we find that from the Christians and the Jews and the Sabi'een as well, there are people who believed and embraced Islam and worked righteousness, and such people will have no fear on Yawm al-Qiyamah, despite all the horrors. We find that what saves you on Yawm al-Qiyamah is not your lineage, nor your nationality, but rather it is Iman and righteous actions. Notice also, it's not just Iman, it must be backed with righteous actions. And nowadays there are so many people who identify as Muslims, but if you were to take a look at their lifestyle, there is not one word of gratitude to Allah Jalla wa Ala, as they have no righteous works. Notice, however, that this ayah does not mean to tell us that the people, that those who are Yahud or Nasara or Sabi'un, are on the right path as long as they work righteousness in their deen. No, they have to embrace Islam, because working righteousness only holds true if it is in accordance with the Sunnah, not in accordance with the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. So this ayah is not an approval of the other adyan. Rather, it is an approval of those people who embrace Islam from the other adyan. هذا والله أعلم.